Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Caroline Millen, and I'm here to present Resilient Leadership in a Trauma-Responsive Environment, Tools for Social Workers to Level Up. Before we begin, I want to start with a trigger warning. As the title implies, we will be discussing trauma, burnout, and emotional exhaustion. Some of the exercises may ask you to think about times in your life, your personal experiences, or maybe those interactions with other people. And we will talk about, trauma and re-traumatization. So please just care for yourself throughout the session. Today's agenda and objectives, the big questions I hope we can answer together are, what does trauma do to people and organizations? How can leaders support resilience? And what practical strategies can I use right away? The learning objectives, I'd like all of us to be able to apply trauma-responsive leadership practices to foster a supportive work environment, reduce burnout, and enhance team resilience within social work settings, and to develop and implement actionable strategies for personal and professional resilience, including goal setting, time management techniques, and self-care practices to maintain balance and effectiveness in high-stress environments. Leveling up, why now? I love that the title was Level Up. I think I'm assuming everyone watching this is doing really important, amazing work and is probably feeling the stress that many of us feel in all fields. I'm an assistant professor at Keystone College, and I know in higher education, we're certainly feeling the stress, and perhaps you can relate to much of what I can share. Burnout is very real in our field as well, secondary trauma, and moral injury. I know especially dealing with some of the cases that you're probably dealing with, this may ring true. I'm sure burnout and secondary trauma are things that you're already familiar with, unfortunately, but moral injury, I wanted to just quickly define in case that's not something you are familiar with. So this occurs when a person is involved in or witnesses an event that violates their morals, values, or ethical code. Emotions are deeply wounded, pain is not expressed, worked through, or healed, and results in long-term behavioral, psychological, or spiritual suffering. So some of what we deal with in these healing professions can cause that kind of moral injury. And over time, if we have repeated instances of this, it's going to have long-term and significant effects. The good news, though, is that resilience isn't necessarily a trait that you're just born with and you either have it or you don't. It is a skill set that we can develop. I did much of my doctoral research and dissertation on resilience. That's what I set out to study. I was teaching a leadership course and noticed that my students were becoming more and more resilient. But through that exploration, I also learned that you can't have conversations about resilience without also understanding trauma. So it's really both sides of that coin. And the goal, we're not trying to fix people. We may not be able to fix people. People go through really tough situations, really challenging situations. And some of those problems, unfortunately, just cannot be solved. But what we can do is build systems that help buffer this stress and have conversations and trainings like this one. Understanding trauma. In case you're not already familiar with this, I like to start with a definition so we're all on the same page. Trauma is an emotional response to an event or a series of events that's physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. Trauma comes in different types, so it could be acute, which is just a single event. Could be chronic or repeated prolonged events over time. Could be complex, multiple invasive interpersonal events. It could be historical or passed down through generations, or it could be vicarious, helping professionals such as teachers, social workers, tend to absorb trauma through the empathy that they feel. So of course, empathy is a good, positive thing to have and helps build compassion and, is really essential in these helping professions, but it can come at a cost. According to the CDC, these are some of the latest statistics. Trauma does increase the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death. So we want to control as much as we can control, but this does have a significant impact. It affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, even the way DNA is read and transcribed. If traumas could be prevented, at least 1.9 million cases of heart disease and 21 million cases of depression could be potentially avoided. And unfortunately, it is far too common. A lot of these statistics come from studies related to children or adverse childhood experiences, in which they found nearly 2/3 of U.S. adults, or 64% just about, reported experiencing at least one adverse childhood experience before the age of 18, and almost 1 in 5, or about 17%, reported 4 or more. Those are huge numbers. And beyond childhood, they've also done studies and found approximately 70% of adults have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their life. So in my field, when I'm teaching on trauma, I teach my students or future teachers that the reality is the majority of the students in their classrooms will have had these experiences. In social work, the majority of clients and also the majority of your team members will have had these experiences. And so it is there. We say leave it at the door, but that's not always possible. And I advocate that we be aware of it and behave accordingly rather than assuming that this isn't the case, because the statistics are clear. And unfortunately, sometimes people don't always care about this issue unless we talk dollars and cents. So it is also very expensive. Trauma is expensive. The economic and social costs to communities total hundreds of billions of dollars every year. So this is a huge, significant problem. As I'm sure you're aware, there are many different types of trauma. These are just a few examples. I like this image created by Self-Love Rainbow that outlines some of them, and I added a few others as well on the sides. The main thing that I like to emphasize is that there is no hierarchy of trauma. Sometimes when something happens to us, we can feel like our story doesn't matter as much because somebody else always has it worse. And that may be true, but the brain and the body don't know what worse is. There really is no ranking system going on. The brain and the body are just going to automatically react, and all of it is hard and all of it has significant impact on the individual and on communities. And so the brain and the body reacting automatically, it might choose one of 4 ways. It might choose all 4 ways. Depending on the situation, somebody can certainly go through all of these phases trying to escape whatever the danger is. They might decide, or the brain and body might decide, that the best bet is to fight, to confront the threat, to use feelings of anger or rage or confrontation to get out of that situation. And that may be true. That may be possible. But if the threat is big or dangerous in some way, that might not be the smartest option. And so it might make more sense to flee or to use flight, to run away from the threat. This is feelings of anxiety, panic, avoidance. Or it might make sense to freeze, just like a possum plays dead, or other animals decide that that is their best choice, again, automatically shutting down to block out the threat. Dissociation, numbness, shutdown. These can all be responses of actual, interpersonal responses, but it can also just be how we respond to everyday stressors. When we're feeling overwhelmed by everything that's on our to-do list, then maybe it causes us to dissociate or shut down because it's just too much. And finally, fawning or appeasing the threat. We see this a lot with people pleasers who have learned that the best way to keep the peace is to just keep the other people happy. And so we see this in, again, those dangerous big T trauma type situations. But perhaps by now you're also thinking of situations in the workplace, in your own environment, where these strategies are also used. And triggers is also interesting. We know, there are very obvious triggers for some people, depending on the situation. If they encountered an upsetting or traumatizing situation and it involved fire alarms, then that loud fire alarm might be triggering, and that makes sense. But depending on the situation, there can be other triggers that are not as obvious. So these images by Lindsey Brahman get at that. So, you might not expect somebody to be triggered by toast or Christmas trees or berry-scented air fresheners, for example. But depending on what happened, those can bring back the sights and smells and experiences of a very traumatic time. And at the deeper level, what those triggers are revealing are our inner core feelings. So maybe feeling powerless or unsafe or disconnected or uncared for. And so getting at what the core feeling is can be really essential to starting to overcome some of these trauma responses so that we can recognize I'm reacting this way because I felt this core feeling of feeling unsafe, for example. And so I'm sure we're all familiar with what that looks like at the individual level. But what happens when we zoom out and we have organizations who are also traumatized as a whole? What happens when the entire system is operating from a trauma response? We might see mistrust, rigidity, high turnover, disengagement, low morale. Things have happened over time, or a sense of safety has not been cultivated, or a sense of resilience has not been prioritized, where people are just essentially done, burnt out, overwhelmed, disengaged. And trauma isn't just about our clients. It really does show up in staff behavior too. And then that spills over into those we're trying to serve. So as I'm talking, think about if you've worked in a place like this and think about what that felt like. Think about what it would feel like to not work in that kind of setting and what would change for you. Stress warning signs and symptoms. These are different warning signs that we might see in the workplace or in ourselves. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. There's cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, physical symptoms, behavioral symptoms. And if we're just noticing one random thing, then maybe that person is just having a bad day and perhaps they come in the next day and they're feeling better. But if we're seeing somebody change from a different temperament, a different way of being, to suddenly being pretty regularly agitated or having a short temper or feeling depressed or not sleeping well or any of these things, then we can get curious. And if we ourselves are starting to feel these things, again, these are warning signs. So it's time to pause and get back on track and put in strategies to get back to a state of homeostasis. But as leaders, which I think many of you are who have signed up for this conversation, that's our job too as supervisors, is to pay attention to our team members and know that they're pouring a lot into their clients, and they themselves might also be dealing with many traumatizing or stressful situations in their own life. And the combination might reveal some of these symptoms. And so what we can do as leaders is use those as cues to get curious and take action. So which of these responses have you seen in yourself or others? maybe some examples come to mind. Keep that in mind as we continue this conversation. Trauma-informed practice requires that practitioners create a safe environment, that practitioners build relationships and connectedness, and support and teach emotional regulation. And so as leaders, we can use these as goals to ensure that not only are our counselors, social workers, therapists doing that within their own offices with their clients, but that the organization overall mirrors those expectations, that that is also a safe environment, that it also builds relationships and connectedness, and it also supports and teaches emotional regulation, so that top to bottom, everything is in alignment. Much of what I'm sharing comes from Michael Unger's work on multisystemic resilience, where we zoom out beyond that initial definition of trauma or of resilience that puts these traits at the individual level. That if you are resilient, you are just somebody who's able to bounce back from adversity. And his work says, well, it's not really that simple. We have someone's natural ability perhaps to just bounce back based on their own experiences, based on how they were raised. But there's more to it than that. They have to also have access to the external resources to be able to be resilient. It's really beyond the individual. Coordinated supports and services are also essential. It's the internal capacities and the external resources. His view is more of a holistic approach to human services. And one of his quotes that I think really encapsulates his work is, in the context of exposure to significant adversity, resilience is the capacity of individuals to navigate their way to the resources that sustain well-being, and the capacity to negotiate for these resources to be provided in culturally meaningful ways. So their own natural resilience levels is also combined with their ability to find those resources and advocate for them. And so if this is sounding familiar, that's a really good sign. If it's not sounding familiar, this would be the goal of how do we get to that place where this is what our environment actually looks like. The trauma responsive care framework comes from, or is adapted from, the Butler Center for Research. And the core principles of this include safety. So is it physically and psychologically safe? Are we avoiding re-traumatization of individuals? Is there trust and transparency, clear communication of what's expected? Is there collaboration and shared decision-making? This isn't just top-down, I told you so, but conversations about what the needs are and how we can support them at a leadership level. Is there empowerment? Are we involving everyone at the table to set goals, to make choices, to self-advocate for what they need? And is there a cultural responsiveness to needs? So again, is everyone at the table? Is everyone included? Are we being mindful that there are different ways to approach a problem and a solution, that there are different priorities among different people? We know trauma does disproportionately affect women, people of color, individuals with disabilities, LGBTQ plus populations, just really any marginalized population. And so knowing that, it's even more essential that those folks are at the table, part of these conversations, rather than us just making assumptions and decisions. So consider where you already see these principles in your work. That is great. And think about where there might be some room to grow. A lot of this is also based in the work of servant leadership, which states that leaders or servant leaders model the behaviors they wish to evoke in their followers. I think especially in education or social work, this is essential because we are teaching people or expecting people to do this with their clients or with their students. And we don't want it to be a do as I say, not as I do situation. We want to actually model that. So again, alignment and integrity through all layers of an organization. Servant leaders acknowledge the context and culture of their environment, the attributes of themselves, and the receptivity of their followers. Again, making sure everyone is at the table. They work on their own emotions. So that goes along with modeling behaviors, but you can't pour into other people, and you can't expect other people to pour into those that they need to serve if you are not in control of your own emotions. Servant leaders put their followers first. They empower others, and they create value for the entire community. This leads to greater performance and growth of the organization. So again, this isn't about perfection. It's about reflection, thinking about to what extent does your organization align to this model, and thinking about what some goals might be to move forward and become more of a resilient, trauma-responsive environment. In practice, this looks like leading with empathy, listening, stewardship. It means awareness, foresight, commitment to the growth of people, building community. I like this quote by Simon Sinek that says, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. So that really reflects that modeling, that demonstration of the expectations through all layers of the organization. And burnout is prevalent, but it comes at a cost. Just like those toxic stress symptoms we might be seeing, we might see cynicism or exhaustion or inefficiency or inefficacy. And according to NASW, there's 3 components of burnout, which is the emotional exhaustion piece, feeling overextended, not having enough energy, feeling fatigued, combined with depersonalization, that cynicism, those impersonal attitudes, just kind of being done with all of it, and the reduced personal accomplishment, feeling that ineffectiveness. This can lead to moral distress and compassion fatigue, especially in helping professionals. But this isn't your fault. Burnout isn't your fault. It's typically a system failure. It's that misalignment of what we set out to do, what we hope to do according to our values and our code of ethics and our missions of the organization, and the realities of the world, that it's stressful and there's not enough people to do all of the work and all of the realities of professional life. And that conflict creates a situation that's not sustainable and therefore leads people to burn out. But because we don't have enough people doing this important work, we need to do everything we can to keep them in the field. We need to do whatever it takes to help them rejuvenate themselves so that they do not want to leave. And as I said, resilience is a skill that can be sharpened. It's not something you either have or you don't. The first step is self-awareness, starting to recognize the stress before it erupts. That would be the goal. Sometimes when we hold on for so long and we don't speak up, it comes out one way or the other, whether we want it to or not. So the goal would be to recognize those feelings, those warning signs I showed you before we blow up, before we erupt, so that we can actually do something about them. Then starting to work on emotional regulation. These are high stress situations. So how do we stay steady under that pressure? And how do we model boundaries and recovery? And how do we foster psychological safety on the team? So of those, or maybe others are coming to mind, think about what leadership skill you personally would like to strengthen this year. This might be your goal for later in this presentation. Time management and goal setting. Why would we talk about time management when we're also talking about trauma and leadership? We know that trauma has so many consequences. It has such an impact. But one of those things is that trauma can disrupt our executive functioning. This can lead to time blindness, decision fatigue, having difficulty prioritizing. And those are tricky when we are employees or when we're leaders. We need to have those skills really under control to be effective. Trauma-informed leadership rejects this culture of burnout, prevents overworking, protects downtime, and enforces boundaries. That has to be built into the model. This prioritization helps prevent that moral distress because there's alignment between the work that is done and the values of the organization and of the individual. If we can align our daily tasks with those values, it will lead to greater satisfaction and lower burnout. And so as I said, based on what we've discussed so far, think about one short-term goal that's aligned with your core value, either a personal core value or maybe the core values of an organization that you work in. Maybe it's about strengthening your resilience, for example. Now let's tie those things together. We've talked about what trauma is, kind of established what a trauma-informed lens is. Let's combine that with these ideas of goal setting and time management and core values to lead to greater success in our organizations. And it's beyond the to-do list. It's not just making a really great to-do list and checking all of those things off. It's being intentional about it. The first thing we have to do is track our time. A very common response when we are thinking about all the things that we have to do, or if we can take on one more thing, is I don't have time. I feel like I don't have enough time. There isn't enough time in the day, hours in the day. You've heard it all. The only way to really be effective in this is to gather data, actual data, so we know or can reveal where the problems might be. And so there are many ways to do this. This template is one example that I've seen where the individual ranks how important these things are to them and then estimates how much time in a week they think they spend doing those things. And then after a week or so of tracking it, they write down how much time they actually spent on those things. And so this was from a former student of mine of how they ranked it, how they estimated, and what time was actually spent. And you can see that a typical week should have 168 hours. So this is correct. But they only tracked about 150 of those hours. So where were the remaining 18.5 hours? How else was that spent? Perhaps watching TV longer than they thought, maybe, not calculating commute time accurately. We're not sure. But the tighter we can get these numbers, the more accurate we can get this time tracking, the easier it's going to see how much time we're spending on things that really are important and are really aligned to our values, and how much time we might be wasting on things that are not aligned or are maybe just not our job. And so you can do something like this, pen and paper. You can also, what I do is just really emphasize tracking it in my Google Calendar. So as often as I can, I go back to the calendar and I write how I spent the day, whether it's working or meetings or just being in the office or grading papers or whatever it is. At the end of my day, I like to have everything blocked off with as close to accurate of how I spent the time so that I have this list and these priorities should I need them. So the first step, tracking your time. Then, while you're tracking your time, you also need to be considering your values. The core values are your foundation, your fundamental beliefs. These are the principles that guide your choices and your behaviors. And these help you determine if you are on the right path to fulfilling your goals. Again, these can be personal values or they can be the values of the organization, depending on how you want to look at this. But we need to know what they are. If you're not sure, these are some guiding questions that might help you think about them. Think about the times when you were the happiest. What were you doing? Who were you with? What other factors contributed to your happiness? Or think about the times when you were the proudest. Why were you proud? Did other people share in the pride? Who shared in that pride? What other factors contributed to this pride? Think about the times when you were the most fulfilled and satisfied. What need or desire was fulfilled? How and why did the experience give your life meaning? What other factors contributed to your feelings of fulfillment? Or consider what qualities you want to be remembered for. Maybe think about somebody in your life, and if you could be like them, that would be great. So what qualities of that person did they exhibit that make you feel that way? What greater purpose would you like to be known for? What impact would you like to have made on those around you? You can think of it as your gravestone, or your obituary. What do you want that to say about you? Maybe those questions will reveal what your core values ultimately are. For social work, and really for many in the helping professions, it might be things like effectiveness, justice, respect, relationships, trust, excellence, community. Pick a few. Aim for 10 if you can. As a starting point, you might refine them over time. You might add more. You might have different versions of this, again, for your personal life versus your professional life. And try to implement them into your life. If you encounter a challenge or an adversity, pause and ask yourself how you might view it differently through the lens of that value. So I have this stressful situation, but I'm going to bring in the qualities of that person I admire, and I'm going to think about, since excellence is a value of mine, then I know this is important, and I'm going to think about the situation through that lens. So as you're tracking your time and thinking about how you're actually spending it and identifying your values, now we can bring those pieces together. Then we have to have a goal. Most organizations have goals. Usually they're driven by finances or enrollments, or they might be quarterly or annually. So there may be organizational goals that you're already aware of, or you can think about personal goals. As I said, perhaps wanting to become a more resilient leader within your organization. Being mindful of a goal needing to be as specific as possible. So I'm sure you've heard of the term SMART goal. Just as a refresher, if you're not familiar, a really well-written goal is going to be specific. So it's going to include details about what, why, who, where, which. It's really all the details necessary. So there's nothing open to interpretation. It will be measurable. So some sort of numbers or metrics that we can actually track to determine how close we are to meeting or exceeding that goal. So things like answering how much or how many. How are you going to know that that's been accomplished? Is it attainable? Can this actually be accomplished? We all have goals that would be nice to achieve, but maybe now is just not the right time. And so we can keep them on the back burner. We can keep them in the back of our mind, but maybe that's not the most important high priority goal to focus on. Is the goal relevant? Does it seem worthwhile? Is now the right time? And time bound. When? What can you do within 6 weeks? What can you do today? These kinds of questions will help you decide if the goal is too broad or not, or if we need to break it down even further. Again, you might have annual goals and quarterly goals, and those are important, but how do you break those quarterly goals down into daily goals that will get you to that quarterly goal? So in special education, we talk a lot about chunking, breaking down a really large topic or project into baby steps so that it's achievable. It's especially important in special education. The same can apply to a goal, breaking that down into its smallest components, remembering that we can do so many things, just like this castle here, but the reality is there are only so many hours in a day, and we have to be realistic about what we can accomplish today so that we don't feel like a failure, so that we feel like we were successful because we set an appropriate, achievable goal, not something that is just going to make us feel bad every day when we don't actually achieve it. The example I like to give, the exercise I like to do with people is thinking about brushing your teeth. So for this metaphor, your goal is to brush your teeth. And when I say that, I know everyone brushed their teeth today and they know exactly how to do that. But when we really think about something like that, that seems obvious, there are actually so many individual steps to the act of brushing our teeth that mimic what I'm asking you to do with a very large goal. So if somebody doesn't know how to brush their teeth, this might be the place to start. Let's say it's a toddler, just learning. I want them first to master the task of walking into the bathroom, saying, okay, it's time to brush our teeth. And they know with that cue where this happens. They know that they need to go into the bathroom. Okay. Once we've mastered that, then we can start pulling in the ingredients for this task. So do they know where the toothpaste is? Can they grab it? Do they have the dexterity to grab it? Can they take the cap off the toothpaste? Can they also grab the toothbrush? Are all of these materials available? Do they have the tools they need to do this job? Are they within reach? Are they at their height? Can they gently squeeze the toothpaste onto the toothbrush, gently, rather than spraying it everywhere? Can they turn on the faucet? Can they wet the toothbrush? Can they turn the faucet back off to save water? I didn't say that here. And can they understand to brush the left outer surface and the front outer surface and the back surfaces, etc., and then rinse the toothbrush and put it away? So all of those tasks, A to Z, and there's more that I didn't list, those are your baby steps. Think about, again, a goal that you might be thinking of. Is it truly broken down into its smallest possible parts? And I hope the toothpaste metaphor encourages you to do that. So goal setting, goal attainment, habit loops. We've discussed SMART goals. Habit loops are also important. This comes from Charles Duhigg's book. He says, first, there's a cue, a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode and which habit to use. Then there's the routine, which can be physical or mental or emotional. And finally, there's the reward, which helps your brain figure out if this particular loop is worth remembering for the future. So if you've read the book, he is using this, different examples, but one that comes up is Alcoholics Anonymous and how the act of drinking or being an alcoholic is fueled by this habit loop, because it's not just about the drinking. It's that the brain is getting rewards by this behavior, and that is what compels somebody to choose that again and again and again. So like when there's a certain cue, when I'm feeling a certain way, perhaps I will drink or I will do whatever because it provides me with a reward. It provides me with a different feeling. And so that reinforces the behavior. Again, zooming out from this metaphor, thinking about goal setting or your organization, are there habit loops that are reinforcing behaviors that are not effective? And can we replace those habits with other habits that get at the same feeling? It's a discussion. It's probably not something I can answer for your organization, but thinking about and getting to know why people are doing the things that they do that's maybe not effective. What's compelling them to continue to do it? Is it because it's the way it's always been done? Is it because it's challenging and maybe overwhelming to do it a different way? Is it because they don't have the tools they need to do that job? Is it because there's not enough people? It really depends on your setting, but thinking about and evaluating what that might look like could reveal why some of these behaviors are taking place. So we've tracked our time, we've established our values. Now we need to, and we've set our goals, now we need to actually analyze our time. Really looking at those numbers, that data. How were those hours in the week actually spent? Did we account for everything, or where were the gaps? Which tasks are truly more important to you or to your organization? Which tasks most align to your values? And which tasks are getting in the way of other things? If we say that something is not really important, and yet we spend a good chunk of time on it, that can reveal an area that needs sharpening. And then we have to experiment. I'm going to give you quite a few strategies here as examples. They might work. One might work. The combination of them might work, or none of them might work. The good news is that this is not an exhaustive list. There are so many strategies out there. These are just the ones that for 20 years now, I have come back to again and again because they work for me, and that's why I'm sharing them. Again, this is a strategy. It's more than just having a to-do list and checking things off the to-do list. There's intention behind the way these things are set up. So keeping your core values and this trauma-informed lens in mind, we can focus on actual priorities instead of distractions or instead of doing things the way that they've always been done. One example is Warren Buffett's two-list strategy. So writing down your top 25 goals for you, for the organization, the things that come to mind when you think of success. Review that list and then circle the top 5 goals, the things that are the most important and that you want more than anything else. That list of 5 then becomes list A, and then the remaining 20 becomes list B. According to Warren Buffett, he says everything you didn't circle just becomes your avoid at all costs list. So list B, avoid at all costs. No matter what, these things get no attention from you until you've succeeded with your top 5 or your list A. Now, you can do it exactly that way, or again, using metaphors. I am ultimately trained as an English teacher. Think about what he's saying. He's saying that the day-to-day we find ourselves in, so much of the time we have to spend energy and time and attention on things that are actually not technically important or not aligned to our values and goals, and yet they suck all of our time. And so getting in the practice of identifying that can help us shift, say no, set boundaries, so that we can actually devote the time required to the most important things for us, for our organization. It might be an actual list, but it might just be a kind of mental recognition when something comes up to say, that's a list B item. We'll come back to that later, but now we're focused on these top priorities and sticking with it. Easier said than done, but a great mental practice. The Ivy Lee method states that at the end of each day, write down the 6 most important things that you need to accomplish tomorrow. Don't write down more than 6, so this helps keep it reasonable and achievable. Prioritize those 6 items in order of their true importance. Then when you arrive the next day, concentrate only on the first task. Work until that first task is finished before moving on to the second. The nice thing there is that the day before, you already decided the order in which you are going to complete those things. So you don't have to be paralyzed by the decision making the day when you're actually doing those things because you've already decided in advance. So you just come in and start doing those things. Approach the rest of that list in the same fashion. And at the end of the day, anything that maybe you didn't get to, that's okay. That goes on the next day's list. And the next day's list, again, has 6 things. Perhaps it's leftovers, perhaps it's new things. And just keep doing this every day. This, again, is a good practice to help us remember that there are only so many hours in the day and that we can turn off the email or we can step away to renew our energy. And if we only focus on 6, it gives us a little bit more of an achievable goal of not setting too many things and also being realistic about what we can actually achieve in a day. The Pomodoro technique is really a great strategy for people that maybe struggle to focus or to stay focused, which I totally understand. There's websites where you can actually just go to like Pomodoro timer and things like that. There's apps called Forest that will do this for you. But at its simplest form, you just need a timer. So it can be your phone. It can be an actual like kitchen timer if you want to keep it analog. Doesn't matter. But you pick a task that you need to accomplish and you work on that task for 1 Pomodoro unit, which in this case is 25 minutes, but you can adjust the times according to what you need it to do. These are flexible and adaptable. But whatever that unit of time is, in this case, 25 minutes is 1 Pomodoro. It comes from the old kitchen timers that looked like a tomato. That's why this is called that. And so you just work for 25 minutes and you stay focused, and that's all you do. And then at the end of the 25 minutes, the timer goes off. You record your progress. You see how far you got. Maybe you finished it. Maybe you didn't. And either way, that's okay. Now, because you stayed focused for 25 minutes, you get to take a short break. Let's say 5 minutes. That's the time where you can step away and check your email, check your phone, watch 5 minutes of television, go for a walk. Whatever brings you joy, that is up to you. But after 5 minutes, after that short break, you go back to work and you keep doing this 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 25 on, 5 off, 4 times. And then after that, you get a long break. So what this has done is kept us focused for about an hour, given us short little breaks in between to keep us energized. Maybe we grab a snack. Maybe we add little candies in there during those short breaks. But it's better to take short breaks throughout and return to focused behavior rather than setting out on something, working for a couple of minutes and then getting sucked in to our phones and losing all of that time. So having the timer is really essential to cue us back into what we're doing. And it takes practice and it won't be perfect right away. But this video, or again, the app like Forest, can help guide you through the exercise until it becomes more natural. Perhaps eventually you don't need the timer anymore, but it's great for keeping focused. One of my favorites is the Eisenhower matrix or Covey's time management grid. They're basically the same. And I used to, when I first learned this method, I used to actually make this and handwrite it. I would take a piece of paper and I would draw 4 quadrants like this, and I would write everything I needed to accomplish in these boxes. Over time, some of it just became mental practice, where if I knew I had to do something, I would mentally filter it into one of these boxes automatically. And I actually now keep my calendar this way. I color code my calendar this way so that at a glance, I have a really clear idea of what things are actually urgent, what things are actually important or not. And so this first box is urgent and important. These are the things that you do first. These are immediate and important deadlines. Actually have a deadline. That's a good clue that this is something urgent and or important. It's things that you have to do today. It's things that are like important, that are aligned with your values. So these are the things we do first. We might still have to do some of these other things in these other boxes, but we don't do them at the expense of this box. This is where we focus. Quadrant 2 is not urgent, but still important. These are the things that you can schedule. You can actually block off time in your calendar to make sure that they get done. Maybe they have more of a long-term deadline. Maybe they need to be done this week or this month, but they don't need to be done today, and they're not as urgent as box 1. It can also be long-term strategizing and development. So we can't not do these things, but they don't need to happen right this second. You just don't want to lose sight of them. So get them on a calendar somewhere. Box 3 or quadrant 3 is urgent and not important. So these are things, if you have the means to delegate, these are great things to delegate. You don't always have to be the person to do it all, even though it feels that way. If you have team members who you can coach and help them build their own leadership skills, perhaps these can be delegated. You have assistants or other team members who can take on more, great, maybe not. And it really just depends on your organization. It doesn't also have to be somebody at a different rank. It can just be another team member. It can be a conversation to say, these are my priorities and I'm feeling like my plate is very full. Is there anyone else available to help offset some of these responsibilities? And also these could be time pressured distractions. So this might be urgent and important to someone else. Somebody else wants it now, but that doesn't mean that it's urgent and important for you. And so this comes with having really clear priorities, values, and boundaries. To know that just because somebody else wants it now, if your plate is already full, the only way that that's going to be prioritized is if something else comes off your first box. So that can give us some confidence in making those decisions. And then quadrant 4 or box 4, not urgent and not important. Minimize or avoid these. I think I like to emphasize minimize because I think I don't want to ever advocate that professional responsibilities are all we should ever focus on, right? So you have to have fun. You have to have brain breaks. You have to scroll on your phone or watch TV or whatever those things are for you. We don't want to choose those things at the expense of other boxes, but we can still schedule them in. These are things we can do when we're taking a break from other quadrants or at the end of the day. And so an example of my calendar, like I said, is red in this case. These are things that are urgent and important. I have to go to work. I don't get to not go to work. So that's not really a negotiable thing in my schedule. But something like doing the quarterly budget update, I need to do that. It's still important, but it's not necessarily urgent. I'm going to schedule it in here on this day and maybe I'll get to it, hopefully, if my week actually stays the way I want it to. But if it doesn't, then I can just bump that to next week. And because I've started this a little bit earlier, I have that flexibility to make sure that that gets done before the actual deadline. But again, not at the expense of high priority items. A report deadline isn't negotiable. I've also added in things like the dry cleaners, for instance, just as an example. I don't always dry clean my clothes, but this is something that's able to be delegated. If I have a lot of laundry to do, but I can delegate it to a laundry service and they can do that while I'm doing something else that I need to do. To me, that's a positive use of my time. I understand that that costs money. This is just an example of those decisions of when something can be delegated if the advantage is that it allows you to focus on your high priority items. And then also things that are not urgent or not important, but still things I want to do. So I want to scroll on my phone for an hour. I want to watch Netflix. Fitting that in when you can. This is just an example of what that might look like, but of course you would adapt this to your needs. Hal Elrod's Miracle Morning, it's based on his book. He suggests that we wake up at least 1 hour earlier so that we have actual time for ourselves. The helping professions, so many presentations talk about self-care, including this one, but often the rebuttal or the objection to that is, I don't have time for that. And so he's advocating that the only way to ensure that you have time for that is to do it before anyone else gets involved in your day. And so that means getting up an hour earlier so that you have time for yourself. He uses this SAVERS acronym to outline what he does in that hour, but you can spend this hour however you want to. He spends about 10 minutes in silence, reflecting, meditating, doing deep breathing exercises, praying, whatever that means for you. 10 minutes doing affirmations. So developing and repeating positive affirmations, getting your head in the right space to take on the rest of your day. 10 minutes of visualization. It could be having a vision board, but otherwise you're visualizing your goals. Maybe you're filling out one of your goal sheets or time management strategies that we just discussed in that time first thing in the morning so that you know what is ahead of you for the day and whether it aligns to those buckets. 10 minutes of exercise. You can benefit mentally from physical exercise, even with a brief workout. So 10 minutes is better than 0 minutes. It is important for us physically and mentally. So if we feel like we don't have time for a full 30-minute, 60-minute workout, can we do 10? And that's better than nothing. 10 minutes of reading. Don't we all wish we had more time to just read for fun? Again, reading for 10 minutes, you'll get further than reading for 0 minutes, even if it's just a few pages. And scribing or writing down and reflecting on your thoughts. Just an example template of how he spends his miracle morning 10 minutes at a time, but you can adapt this with whatever is important to you so that at the beginning of the day, you have that time for yourself to tackle the rest of the day. It's important to remember with all of these strategies that no matter how perfect our time management system works or looks, there's going to be things that happen that we can't control. And so we can't control how other people behave, how they react, their boundaries, their attitudes, the things that happen, the world. We can't control those things, unfortunately, but we can control the boundaries that we set. We can control whether or how we let other people affect us, when or if we forgive other people, where we give our time, energy, and attention, how we speak and treat others, and our response to other people's behaviors. So shifting our energy as we create these systems and values and buckets to make sure that this is where we are emphasizing our energy so that we can kind of release the things we can't control. And so as we go through all those steps of tracking our time and establishing our values and setting goals and analyzing the time and experimenting with the different systems that I showed or others that are out there, we have to remember that we're not done. The process is never finished. We have to reflect and adjust as needed. One system might work really well for a certain season in your life, and then suddenly extra things come up and it's just no longer effective. So going back, tracking or analyzing our time and continuing this process and having that be okay. It's not a one and done, unfortunately. Getting in the habit of, instead of saying, I don't have time, saying it's not a priority and being okay with that, or seeing how it feels. And if you want it to be a priority, what else needs to change? It's a good mantra. Also, don't watch the clock. Do what it does. Keep going is a good way to help us remember those aspects of life that we can't control, but we can keep going. We can keep trying. We can keep experimenting and reflecting. And a dream written down with a date becomes a goal. A goal broken down into steps becomes a plan. A plan backed by action becomes reality. So again, taking those really lofty goals or even dreams and breaking them down into those baby steps means we can actually accomplish them. So with all of this in mind, how do we embed resilience into our teams? We can create a culture that normalizes seeking help. We don't need to have this all figured out for ourselves. We as leaders can talk to our teams about the things we're trying and experimenting and having really frank conversations about what is or is not working. We don't have to have it all figured out. We have to just keep trying. We can encourage breaks and detachment from stress. We can reflect as supervisors on what is or is not working, and we can have honest conversations about that. We can celebrate wins and acknowledge pain. We don't have to ignore these negative aspects of the workplace or of the world that is so riddled with trauma. We can have conversations that bring it to light and work around it rather than ignoring it. And as supervisors or leaders, we can adopt a mantra that says, I care about you and your performance. We don't have to solely focus on performance-based measures, metrics, those quarterly figures. We have to care about them for the sake of the business, but we also need to care about the people who are accomplishing those metrics. And so doing both, making sure that those people are okay, because if they leave, we have to backfill positions. We lose time and money training replacements if we can even find them. And it is a wiser investment of our time to make sure that we are nurturing our existing team members than having to start from scratch. So this takes a culture shift, or it may take a culture shift. Hopefully, I'm hoping that you've resonated with a lot of what I'm saying, but if not, it's going to take a conversation and a culture shift. Setting up a culture that encourages debriefs after crisis events. This week was really traumatizing, I think, for a lot of people. And I walked into my classroom with a plan of what I was going to cover, and my students just wanted to debrief. And so I set aside my lesson plan for the day and we just talked. And I got some really great ideas about future conversations, future trainings I'm going to put together for them based on their anxieties. And it was really helpful. And at the very least, they just needed to vent and feel and see that everyone else in the room was feeling very similarly. And so that's okay. That's not time lost. There's different advantages to that experience. We can encourage peer support and structures. We can encourage inclusivity. Again, is everyone represented at the table? We can avoid toxic positivity. It doesn't mean focusing on the positive at all times. It means continuing to move forward just like the clock does, but acknowledging the reality. We don't want to create a culture where feedback is given and people are compelled to retaliate. We have to be able to accept feedback and to move forward from a spirit of continuous improvement. And we want to avoid a culture where overload is the norm. So think about what's one policy that you'd change to reduce burnout. Some additional tools you can use tomorrow. Quick grounding strategies. There is a video here of box breathing if you want to come back to it, but basically, I'm sure you're familiar, just inhaling for 4 counts, holding that breath for 4, exhaling for 4, holding that exhale for 4. Having email signature reminders of your hours and that you may not respond outside work hours. Combating the culture that expects us to be on 24/7. Having peer accountability goals so that everyone has the same expectations and they hold each other accountable to not do more than is necessary. And self-care. Understanding the wellness wheel, that wellness is not just physical wellness, but it's social, emotional, spiritual, all of these aspects. Remember that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Even our hearts do this. The heart has to replenish its own blood, oxygenated blood, before it pumps to the rest of the body. Or being told you can't put on somebody else's oxygen mask until you put on your own, because if you pass out, you can't help them. Whatever metaphor works. To be able to care for other people as you do in this field, you have to care for yourself. So you can decide, and I'm sure there's plenty of additional trainers talking about self-care, but I just want to emphasize that you have to. It's not negotiable. It is what resilient leaders do. There are some examples here of ways to reframe dealing with difficult people or challenging behaviors. My favorite one is, instead of thinking what's wrong with this person, think about what might have happened to this person. Why might they be the way that they are? What might they be feeling? Why might they have suddenly changed how they're behaving in the workplace, for instance? Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe something traumatic happened. Ultimately, they need our support and validation and consistency, not our criticism. It's our responsibility, especially as leaders, to support them. We can build successful teams by remaining calm under pressure, adapting to change, fostering a positive work environment. We can navigate crises aligned to our values. We can inspire confidence, lead with strength and determination. And we can overcome adversity by staying focused, embracing failure as a learning opportunity, and persisting with a positive attitude toward achieving our goals and navigating resources. Moving from now trauma-informed to trauma-responsive, I want to emphasize that we need to adopt and strive for cultures that are sensitive to those with trauma histories, not just the clients that we serve, but the team members themselves, and recognize that the quality of services delivered are impacted by the organizational culture in which service providers are employed. So really aligning all of these aspects of the organization from top to bottom and bottom to top will lead to less burnout and less turnover, keeping good people in the field like we need to. Now, from here, your homework is to reflect. Even if you are not in charge, even if you are not a formal titled leader, think about how you can acknowledge the hard work and past successes while continuing to achieve. Think about how you can persist when demands are high and resources are strained. What does your team need? Have you asked them lately? How can you establish and maintain personalized leadership philosophies in alignment with the organizational values and priorities we discussed here? And how can you strengthen resilience and other essential leadership skills while maintaining this trauma-informed and trauma-responsive lens? If you have any questions or want to keep in touch, my email is here, caroline.millen@keystone.edu. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your time.